Good evening, boils and ghouls, and welcome to Nick's random Halloween Spooktakular. And I've got to be honest, Halloween never really was my thing growing up. It's not that I hate the season, just that it's the time where everyone suddenly starts to love the things that I used to be called weird for liking outside of October. I love horror of all kinds, classic shit from the 1930s right up to the decadent 1980s with the likes of Freddy Krueger and Friday the 13th. And yeah, I did just call Nightmare on Elm Street Freddy Krueger because fuck it, he's the most memorable thing in the whole franchise besides the time that Johnny Depp got killed in a mattress. But despite my love for horror films, I've never been all that wild about horror video games. I mean, I like the Resident Evil series well enough, but outside of that, I either find them boring or just not fun to play. That's disgusting. That is legitimately terrible, but the can's cool because it glows in the dark. My original idea for this review was to either cover the first Resident Evil game, which unfortunately, I weirdly don't own in any way, shape, or form. At all. Or one of its many clones, like Deep Fear, which is right behind Sub-Zero over there, which is a nice little Sega Saturn exclusive, and their answer to Resident Evil, which is weird, because Resident Evil was on the Sega fucking Saturn. Weird. Redundant. I love it. It's so unmistakably 90s Sega. But I decided, no, that's not my thing. I'm not the horror video game guy. That's Nitro Rad. Why would I ever try to encroach on his thunder? I'm going to leave his thunder alone and not steal it. Not that there's any chance of that. But I am a fighting game guy. I love me some good old-fashioned fisticuffs. And there are a couple of horror-themed fighting games out there, like Darkstalkers, or hell, technically Mortal Kombat counts. But you want to know the thing that those two series have in common? They're actually pretty good. So for today's review, I decided to take up necromancy, as one casually does, and dug up the dead to bring you a review of a game so terrifying, so horrifying, that it never saw the light of day. A game so macabre and disturbing that the developers had no choice but to seal its evil away forever, in hopes that it would remain dormant. But through the magical powers of modern technology, I have revived this evil. I have such sights to show you. But as I'm sure somebody says, all good evils have a backstory. When Mortal Kombat hit the arcades in 1992, it was an instant overnight success, capturing the hearts of gamers much in the same way that Kano captured the hearts of his opponents. This set in motion a series of events where every single Western developer figured, hey, Mortal Kombat is making a shit ton of money, and Mortal Kombat has a shit ton of gore, so we should try to emulate that to make a shit ton of money ourselves. The problem is that Mortal Kombat was essentially lightning in a bottle. You can emulate it, but you can't ever actually duplicate it. Even their own creators, Midway, failed to do so. Each Mortal Kombat entry tried to one-up the last in terms of how shocking and over-the-top its trademark finishing moves were, and every clone tried to do the same. Mortal Kombat had heads being ripped off, Primal Rage had monkeys pissing on each other, and Tattoo Assassins had legally safe Nancy Kerrigan farting flames. It was a natural course of progression. But by the time we got to MK3 and its update, Ultimate MK3, we were kind of getting desensitized to it all. Hell, Mortal Kombat 4 barely sold any units in arcades, to the point where I had no idea it existed until the 5th game came out, and I was a huge fan of the series. I was actively following it. It became clear and apparent that if games that focused exclusively on the brutal, wanton violence, they would need to step their shit right the hell up. Enter Thrill Kill, a fighting game developed by Paradox that initially started as a game based off Mesopotamian culture that actually started as a sports game, believe it or not. It was actually that weird little game that they play in Road to El Dorado. The thing is, the publishers kept telling the developer, Paradox Development, to make the game a little more violent, and by a little more, I mean a lot more. Eventually, this led to the natural progression of Aztec's sports game to Rob Zombie's Power Stone. Thrill Kill was cancelled for a number of reasons. Partly because it was to be the very first game ever made to have an adults-only rating from the ESRB, and also partly because it made light of things like mental illness and dwarfism. But the biggest reason was because the game switched publishers from Unfucked Interactive to Electronic Arts, who had connections to Joe Lieberman, who, if you know anything about the history of video game violence, is why the ESRB even exists. But I mean, that couldn't be it, right? When has the government ever overreached its bounds and tried to tell the people what they were and weren't allowed to consume? Why, that would be absolutely tyrannical of them. And if you can't trust the government, who can you trust, really? Honestly, the government is probably the scariest of monsters. Needless to say, the game got absolutely shit-canned, before getting reskinned as Wu-Tang Shaolin style, which is known for being a shit game that came out with the worst controller of all time. But what is Thrill Kill even about? Every fighting game needs a story to keep you interested and to give the fight some context, right? Well, the goddess of secrets, Maruka, that is a stupid fucking name, got bored one evening and decided to have a bunch of damned souls fight it out in a tournament, with the prize being divine reincarnation. And that's it, that's the plot. And honestly, that's all you need. It's a paper-thin excuse to string some fights together for a fighting game's arcade mode. But the other thing that a fighting game needs to be good is a roster of memorable characters. So, if released, do you think we'd be stacking our thrillin', killin' castmates up there with the likes of Ryu, Scorpion, Morgan Ainsland, or Terry Bogard? No, we would not. At all. In fact, I would consider it an executable offense if you even mentioned them in the same breath. No. We would not. To start, we have Tormentor, who is just a big muscly dude with a chain and gimp mask. Belladonna, a dominatrix, and of course the character that all of the marketing focused on, I wonder why, Tom Cruise's taller brother, Jaws, and you know what, fuck it. The rest of the cast is so fucking forgettable that I'm not even going to make up funny names for them. The only ones that stand out is the dominatrix and the dwarf, okay? Everyone else is late 90s Marilyn Manson music video shit. They all look like they belong in a fucking Image comic. Hell, the dwarf isn't even memorable because he's a dwarf, but because he looks like Stone Cold Steve Austin wearing assless chaps. Each character has an appropriately edgy backstory, like Tormentor being a judge who decided to take things into his own hands and torture and murder criminals after the death of his wife. Violet, a contortionist who died from having her spine ruptured, and my favorite one, Cletus, a cannibal that died from a tapeworm infection. Yeah. Imagine being in a lineup of notorious murderers, and when it comes time to explain to Satan how you died, you have to go through the awkward story of how you got offed by a fucking sausage, which is a real possibility for the guy behind Ordinary Sausage. The gameplay in Thrill Kill feels oddly polished for a game that was never even released. I never ran into any crashes or game-breaking bugs during my time playing it. But that doesn't mean the game is good, just that it functions. Each character has 2 punch and kick buttons for normals, a block button, as well as a button for crouching, which also gives access to crouching variations of their normals. You do have a good selection of special moves done using Street Fighter style inputs, but honestly I never found a lot of these all that useful, and many times my opponent would interrupt me mid-attack or just block. And there's not really any way to get around blocking, except for throws, which, yeah, you better believe I used the hell out of. Now, unlike most fighting games, Thrill Kill doesn't use the tried and true method of a health bar. No, instead you have a kill meter, which increases as you deal damage. Fill it up, and you can execute one of your many fatalities, appropriately called Thrill Kills, very creative, to take one of your opponents out of the match. And I stuttered there, and I'm keeping it because it's amusing. Wait, one of your opponents? Oh, yeah, see, the The thing that this game was being touted as was the first 4-player 3D fighting game, which I guess it was. I don't know, was this supposed to come out before Power Stone? It even made use of the PlayStation's multi-tap adapter, which nobody fucking owned, allowing for you and 3 soon to not be your friends anymore to engage in some old ultra-violence. And honestly, this game would have been way better as a one-on-one fighter. See, when you kill an opponent, that ends the round. The next round starts up with just you and the other fighters who survived the last round. This makes the game become incredibly tedious when you've got 4 players. Doubly so when you fill up the kill meter, as they start dodging like fucking madmen, and you can only really catch an opponent on sheer dumb luck or if they're stupid enough to go in the corners. The fighting mechanics here are also not incredibly deep. Like, you do have a parry that can get you out of nasty situations, as well as throws, special moves, juggle combos, but I never found a lot of those super useful, and oftentimes I would just rely on big single hits to max out my meter and end the fight as quickly as possible without any real sense of strategy. Thrillkill's gameplay is slow and torturous, feeling more akin to having your flesh pulled from your bones with hooks than an actual legitimate video game. This isn't something you play to blow off steam or have fun. It's a game you play when you want to blur the line between pleasure and pain. But mostly pain. But I mean, that's fine. We're not here for deep mechanics or anything. We're here to see blood and gore and all sorts of shit. Oh, it's fucking awful. Literally just tastes like the great pumpkin shat in my mouth. Oh god, that's terrible. Why would you make this? Who thinks of this? This is disgusting. Quit putting pumpkin in good things and ruining them. Worst part, 2 fucking cans of this. Ugh. God, that's wretched. Why would you do that to beer? What has beer ever done to you? And sadly, Thrillkill is fucking lame. None of the fatalities are all that great. In fact, every character shares the same 4 ones. You have the decapitating punch or kick, the smash them into bits one, the launch them into the ceiling and watch their blood rain down and splat them against the wall. You do get a character-specific fatality on the last opponent only, but even those are just okay and almost always end with the opponent either exploding or getting decapitated or some equally lame shit, and honestly, none of this would have been super offensive in 1998. And the stages are very much the same level of uninteresting. Dark, gloomy gray, brown, and green arenas with nothing to interact with. Like, my god, imagine how cool it would be if we had environmental finishing moves, like smashing someone to death with one of these urinals, or throwing them into the sewer. That would be neat. I really hate when you fill your meter though. Like, yeah, sure, it does mean you're winning, which should be awesome, but it's always announced by this unskippable cutscene that breaks the flow of the game entirely. And of course, your opponents know you only need 1 touch to kill them, so they start Korean backdashing to avoid death, in a game of high-stakes keep-away like this was fucking Budokai 3. And of course, because this is a game of the late 90s, running was not invented yet. I don't know, I've never tried to fucking murder someone before, but I feel like if I were to do that, I would be moving a hell of a lot faster than the characters in this game. Your movement is painfully slow and awkward, and everyone runs like they've got something up their ass, which, some of them probably do, so kudos to the developers for realism, I guess. But surely the game makes up for its lame fatalities and mediocre gameplay with a huge bevy of fighting modes for players to sink their teeth into, right? The game was mostly finished, and hey, you see what I did there? Sink their teeth into? Like, you know, because it's Halloween and vampires are commonly associated with Halloween. Originally, I was going to be dressed as Dracula, but I didn't want to bother. This game really wasn't worth the effort. So if you couldn't tell, I was, of course, being sarcastic. Because this game's selection of modes is thinner than my desire to live. You have arcade mode, which upon completion you get the the very poorly rendered FMVs for your sadist of choice. They're not Tekken quality, but they're something. You got versus mode and team battle, and that's it. Can you tell that this game's not finished? Arcade mode is how you unlock the bosses, and I didn't unlock any except for Kane because I honestly found the game so fucking boring. I only went through arcade mode once in its entirety. You have to go through 3 rounds every single fight, fighting the same opponents, doing the same fucking fatalities until you reach the final boss, who is painfully easy. Versus mode is your standard versus mode, but it does do some things that irk me. See, after you play a match, it asks you if you want a rematch, and if you select yes, you sit through a loading screen and start a match with all of the same characters as before. If you hit no, you go right back to the title screen with no option to go back to the character select screen. This means that if you want to play another match with different characters or on a different stage, you have to sit through 2 loading screens that last about 15 seconds each, which I am playing this on an emulator with the ISO being on an SSD, so I mean that should reduce it a fair bit, meaning it might actually be longer if you try to play this on original PS1 hardware. You then have to go through the process of choosing your fighter and stage, and then go through the most painful process of the entire thing, which is playing Thrill Kill. Team Battle is actually the most interesting mode, as it's a straight-up tornado tag team match, in which you and a partner fight another team of 2 with a shared kill meter. While still not fun because it's Thrill Kill, it's at least something different, which is honestly the most positive thing I can say about this game. But now I have to ask the biggest question. Should this game have been cancelled? Was it really that offensive for the time, all things considered? Yeah, kind of. I mean, not for the reasons that it was, because to be brutally honest, this is so fucking silly and cartoonish and over the top that I don't think anybody would have even been remotely disgusted by it. It's so tame and stupid that it's barely offensive. It's like what a teenager of the 90s thinks is edgy. I'm shocked there's not boogers and farts in this game. I guess they had to be saved for Clay Fighter. That's a real thing. It was actually a big franchise for a while, to the point where they made an exclusive game for the N64 that you could only get at Blockbuster. Yes. And Blockbuster thought they were gonna beat out Netflix. No. The writing was on the fucking wall years before Netflix ever existed. But Thrill Kill is just terrible. None of the moves feel good. Movement is slow and clunky, to the extent that it makes UFC on Dreamcast look like fucking Tenkaichi 3 in terms of movement options. And the game's defining feature, the Thrill Kills, are only half of that. They're kills, but I ain't feeling no motherfucking thrills. I don't think even the most Christian of moms in the 1990s would have even considered reaching for their pearls if they saw this. I can't even be mad at the game for being as mediocre as it is, because it never got released. This version that I'm playing is only a beta, so maybe with a bit more time in the oven it could have been okay at the very least. But as it currently is, I'm going to have to give Thrill Kill on the PlayStation 1 a Nightmare on Elm Street Part 6 Freddy's Dead out of 5. I always heard about this game, be it from magazines back in the day or YouTube videos. Like, ooh, it was so offensive that it couldn't be released. Yeah, it was, I'm gonna call bullshit on that and say that it was due to EA's political connections. The game is a poor man's Power Stone with whips and chains and a little tomato ketchup. The violence is so silly and cartoonish that it barely registers. The fighters are stock and unimaginative, and the fighting mechanics just don't make for a fun fighting game at all. You'd be better off playing literally any other fighter on the PS1. I would say that even Tekken 3 is more worth your time, and I fucking hate Tekken 3. But what of the developer, Paradox? Well, After Thrillkill, they put out Wu-Tang Shaolin Style using the same engine, and it also came out with a shitty controller. But they also put out the surprisingly good X-Men Mutant Academy games on the PlayStation and eventually the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube, before being bought out by Midway and getting to work on Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks, which is my favorite game in that whole franchise. And it's weird to think that that game that I love so much came from this pile of shit, and you can kind of feel that when you play Shaolin Monks. Which means that Thrillkill could have potentially been really good. It just wasn't. I would say that it's sad that they got shut down in 2008, but besides Shaolin Monks and X-Men, they didn't really put out anything all that great, mostly just terrible backyard wrestling games, and TNA Impact, which is a much better game than people would have you believe. And really, not much was lost. And that's it for the review. But before I go, I would like to wish each and every one of you a happy Halloween. This year, I might be taking a bit of a break in November. I don't know if there's going to be a review. If there is, it might be just audio only. I am gearing up for my very first theme month since starting this channel. And it's probably going to be my biggest challenge yet, because the goal, the idea, I only wrote so far into the script, so this is entirely off the cuff, which, as you all know, I'm incredibly good at, is to review a Pokemon game for every week in December. Whether or not I will meet that goal, I don't currently know. But here's hoping. God, this shit's terrible. I really hope that the Christmas beer is better.